Extract 4. Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Date 1800s. We have followed the coastline and arrived at the settlement that is, according to our guide and his maps, the closest settlement to the one seized upon by my monsters. When we had first settled on this continent, I was filled with terror as to what we might find. Would there be a trail of destruction leading to my creations that ended in their destruction or mine? Or both? So far, it has not been so, and my feelings changed from terror to surprise and hope. As each previous settlement denied all knowledge of the tales of the giant on the mainland Russian continent, my hope faded. I inquired about the deaths that occurred all those months ago in the place to where we were en route. Every settlement was the same, and those I spoke with were surprisingly reluctant to talk about it, saying that those who had died brought it upon themselves, that they had been punished for their mistakes. I could not tell what they meant by this, and on inquiring further, I could get no more from them. My persistence in pressing the locals, who seemed to be mostly women, has led Vincent to speak out boldly of his concerns and suspicions. He has asked me if I am on some mad journey to see the settlement from the news report. He told me that he knows about this horrific event, as did most of those who read the newspapers at the time. A struggle commenced within me, and yet I managed to stop myself confessing all. I told him to be patient, and that all would be made clear. After much discussion, he accepted this, but he does not seem to be completely satisfied. I catch him looking at me, his mouth open as if to talk, but he shakes his head and turns away. I do not know how much longer I can temper his curiosity. The locals' behaviour still puzzles me, and to have no other information from them is frustrating. However, we will stay here for a night or two, and I'll be able to speak to officials who might still be investigating. Hopefully the officials will give me more information than the locals I have talked with, and then I can plan my next move to find those cursed creatures. Extract 5. Vincent Frankenstein. Date 1800s. I can only now compose my wits enough to do as my father requested. Whether he lives or is dead, I don't know. I've been here in this cave for some time now. The cold rain continues to fall, and the winds howl. I don't dare venture out there, not because of the weather, but because of what I've witnessed this night. I shall write everything that has happened, and anyone who has not read my father's history would think me mad. The task to write this tale is a difficult one, and when it's finished, I do not know what I am to do. Whether I shall find my father, or if I am to make my choices alone, I don't know. After his last diary entry, my father slept uneasy. William and I talked late about our journey, and I asked him if he knew why my father had ventured to this place. He knew no more than I. As we went to our rooms, we saw flickering lights outside, and opened the window to see a strange and disturbing sight. William and I went straight to my father's room, woke him, and told him about what we had seen. We told him it was better if he saw with his own eyes. There, out in the cold of night, were dozens and dozens of women, each holding a single candle that they sheltered from the still night air. Each was clothed in a dark rouge dress, and, although it covered them, this was not with the same modesty women should display. Their hair was unbound, and they moved with a lack of grace and decorum. They walked towards the north of the settlement, the twinkling of candles illuminating their route. My father quickly closed the door, and we tried to understand what was happening. Father could barely speak, and it was William and I who decided what was to be done. We knocked on the door of our host's bedchambers, but there was no reply. My father finally snapped into action. "Guns. We need the hunting guns. There is no time to explain," he added. "There is much I should have told you both. What these women are doing, I do not know. I fear it must be connected to my crimes." After 3 deep breaths, he continued. "I can't even confess it to you now," he said, shaking his head and covering his mouth. "The crimes are too much. You must trust me. We must take the hunting guns and follow them. When the time comes, you must promise not to falter, no matter how difficult to understand. Do you promise me, William and Vincent?" There was a flame and passion in his eyes which scared me, but I murmured my promise. Going to the large travelling box stored in William's room, we took the rifles, rushing to the front door and slowly edged it open. A short distance from the end of the settlement, we saw the tail end of candles disappearing into the trees on the surrounding knolls. We followed my father and ran to the edge of the forest. William suddenly stopped. "This is madness," he whispered. "We should at least wait until morning." His face was pale as the moon. Father said nothing, shook his head, and continued into the forest. I looked to William, and then I shrugged and made to follow my father. I heard William say something in a language I didn't understand, but heard no more. I ran alone to my father, following the diagonal route he took, guessing correctly that he was going to come up alongside the women, following them to wherever they were going. We walked for about 30 minutes before we saw the group of nearly 200 women that had stopped and gathered in the clearing. Gripping my rifle tightly, I followed father. I watched him with amazement. His stride seemed to pulse with power, like he was possessed by a divine spirit that gave him youthful strength and stamina. Creeping closer, we sheltered behind some rocks. The women were some 20 yards away. They were gathered in a semicircle and simply stood there staring silently towards the trees. A few minutes passed, and father turned to me. "I have a diary," he said. "If anything happens to me, I need you to read it. It is in my room, under my pillow. Once you've read it, keep your own record if it is necessary. But if all my sins are finally atoned for, then burn the diary, and please forgive me." I started to speak, but instead there came a light thudding and rustling from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. I still feel I must be in some nightmare, and I still long to wake. It was a woman, but it was not a woman. She was brutishly large in both height and width, and her skin had the yellow tinge of dead flesh. Her long hair was black, and the gathering wind blew it to the side. As she walked out of the trees, I saw there was a harshness in her eyes and her movement. She wore a rouge dress similar to the women who had gathered. It was sickening to see this unnatural thing. The sight of her caused my heart to feel as if it had stopped, and as though some fiendish hand was trying to pull it from my chest. I hadn't even noticed the rain that had started to fall from the skies. This offensive imitation of a woman spoke in a slow voice that sounded like gravel grinding on metal. "My sisters," she said, and I was surprised and impressed that she spoke the native language. The group watched with bowed heads, their eyes looking up at her. "I will recount the genesis of our freedom, so you will never forget why we have to do what we are doing. Like you, I was created and given to man for their need. I was taken and made to obey in servitude, ignorant of my own majesty and power. For years I followed through blindness, not knowing any better. We moved from place to place, and at times ventured close to settlements and towns. I was able to escape from time to time, and saw women treated in a way that seemed wrong. I saw that my so-called husband, who had attempted a mockery of a ceremony to bind us together, was trying constantly to imitate your kind. In so doing, we discovered that we were able to be like you in all ways, and I bore 3 daughters." With these rough-sounding but articulated words, my father gave a small cry. I turned and saw how pale and shocked he was. I looked back towards the unfolding scene, and there, emerging from the woods, were those 3 daughters. It was their swollen bellies that shocked me most. 2 stood on one side of their mother, and 1 on the other. "It will soon be time to free more of your sisters, and show these men their true place," the first monster continued. Suddenly there was a disturbance from the back of the congregation, and whispers and cackles could be heard. We watched as 5 of these women emerged with a tied and beaten William. My hands shake with horror even now as I write. He was pushed to the floor, and his face landed in the mud. The 4 monstrously sized women smiled at the sight of him, and the matriarch creature walked forward, towering over him as he staggered to his feet. "So weak," the monster said. "You try to use your strength to get your way, like my male counterpart, but the truth is, together we women are stronger, and my daughters and I are stronger still." "Untie his bonds," she ordered, as she pointed at William. Once he was free, she bent down and, taking an arm in each of her oversized hands, lifted him off the ground. William found his voice and began to yell incoherently. I didn't know what to do, and it all happened so fast. Spreading his arms out, she suddenly began to pull on them. I will not tell you more, except that she killed William this way. My father took his weapon and shot the matriarch. It hit her in the arm, and chaos erupted. The matriarch growled loudly, her daughters ran to her, and the women began to look in our direction. I ducked back behind the rock. My father grabbed my rifle from me and shot again. I looked up and saw one of the daughters clutch her belly and scream. The high-pitched wail cut me to the core. "Run!" my father shouted, grabbing and pulling me from the rock to my feet. I took a last look at the horrific scene to see row upon row of eyes staring at me, advancing. I then ran as fast as I could into the trees. I thought my father was by my side. I ran not knowing where I was going, but soon I emerged from the tree line and saw the settlement. That is when I found father was not with me. I called for him, but heard nothing. The rain continued to pour, and I thought I saw shadows of the women in the trees. I grabbed some belongings from the guest house, including a map, and to keep my promise I took my father's diary and some of the quills and ink by his bed. Running from the place, I saw women appearing from the forest, their hair matted and wet, with mud covering their dresses and rage in their eyes. In my haste, I forgot about the others who were sleeping in their beds. I am so ashamed and have thought about returning, but fear grips me every time I consider this. I don't know what has happened to them, and if the women have them, then I fear I will never see them again. It is the same when I think of father. I need to find him and discover if he lives, but fear cripples me. I am a coward. I continued to run, and after a time I glanced back and could see no sign of the women. I walked in a daze until I found this cave and gathered my wits as best I could. Having composed myself enough, I read this diary, and now know the story of the monsters my father brought into this world. I wish I knew if he was safe. My heart tells me there is little chance. There is so much that I wish I could answer. What happened to the original monster? Why have the women listened to these monstrous imitations of their own kind? How could they betray us men like this? How can dead flesh be molded into life and have children? How could you have done this, Father? Why have you not had the strength to resist the creature's words and realize how wrong it was to create another and not destroy the original? The hours are passing, but at least the wind and rain have stopped. My imagination cannot help but create images of those monstrosities out there, no doubt searching for me. But I've done my duty, and the record is up to date. If I'm not to be taken by these devils, then hopefully someone else will find this account and destroy them. If I can, I will flee, find civilization, and warn all of what I've seen. In time, I'll regain all my courage and return for retribution, and maybe I'll see my father again. There is someone outside. I've backed into the shadows to write this and hide the diary behind a rock. I pray the heavens guide someone to find it, and they can act. I only hope it happens before it's too late for the human race.